Well, hello everybody, episode 9, here we go. Please make sure to like and subscribe down here. Thank you all who've been following the channel and showing us some love. Really appreciate all the subscribers. And thanks to all of you who've been commenting. We've been giving away a couple of free cards every time these videos have been going out. We know we need to be a little bit better. It's probably putting it on a live stream or something so that everyone can see it. But make sure to comment first, and whatever the random commenter is after that, you can get an opportunity to have a card before they're released to anybody. So make sure to have everything subscribed. That way you can get your free card. So what are we going to talk about today? Just quick updates on everything so you're all in the loop. Cartridge packaging is just on the way now. We're just waiting to put the cartridges which are filled into the packaging, and then they'll be available for retail sales. We are just trying to populate the website. It is sort of tough because there's only like one product right now, and so gummies will be following, and then a couple more products after that. So even if we just have the cartridges up there, we think it's important for anybody who wants a cartridge that they can just buy it from the website directly. So we're just working on that. Gummies packaging's ordered, just waiting for that to arrive. We have just done a lot of different timelines for when we expect all products to be available for sale. We're looking at like the 16th of July is probably where we're going to be at, having multiple products available. And then I would say, coming into the end of June, the first week of July, we should have at least the carts up for sale. So, a few more weeks, but we are just about there. So thank you everyone for your patience. So today we wanted to just talk a little bit more about just cannabis in general, right? How do we get from the seed in the ground to the oil pen? It's important that every one of our followers has a good understanding of like what does it take to go from this little seed in the ground to this oil in your pen. And so I just wanted to walk you through the process. I wanted to talk about a couple of different types of extraction, and really just try to give you some education as to what is going on behind the scenes. So let's take it from the top. So obviously we start off our season. Great, it's time to grow. What do? We get our seeds. Seeds go into the ground, and then from there, obviously the seeds get looked after, and you need to make sure there's the correct nutrients, that the soil is right, that they're being watered enough, and then from there, the season can be anywhere from like 7 weeks to 11, 12 weeks, depending on if it's an indica or a sativa plant. And that's why you'll typically see more indicas or hybrids, because it just takes so much longer to grow a sativa. And so once the plant is coming to the end of its cycle, then it needs to be chopped. Once it's chopped, this is where it gets tricky, because now we need to dry everything. And depending on what you're growing, you will want to hang dry it, meaning that all the terpenes are saved. Or if you're doing large volume of, let's say, for instance, hemp, you would want to make sure that everything gets dried quickly. So if you're doing like 4 acres, that's going to take up like a 4,000 square foot room 2 times over. So it begins, very quickly to say, where are we putting all of this stuff? How do we dry it all? And so once we figure out, okay, where we've got everything dried, then it needs to be trimmed. It needs to be bucked. Bucked means removing the buds from the stem itself, and then they need to be trimmed. So machine trimming, then touched up by hand, and then they will either go into extraction or it'll be some other product line. So when we talk about extraction, what are we exactly talking about? Well, we're talking about removing all the oils and all the plant flavors from the buds themselves. And there's 3 types of ways to do that. Actually, just 4 now that I think about it. So we'd have pressure, which would be CO2. We could also have like solvents, which would be butane, or it would be ethanol. And then you also have what some people debate, like water. Water is a solvent, but water is for like ice water hash. And then you also have just straight pressure as well, which is heat and pressure, which would be something like rosin. So if we take it from the top, every extraction is going to have pros and cons to it, and some people will prefer different types of extractions depending on what's best for them. So often what you'll see is that the butane people will say that rosin is no good. You'll have the rosin people that are saying solvents are no good. I think that if you've got a good extract and it's done correctly, there's normally not much I can really say. So for me personally, I think butane is the way to go. I think that the rosin definitely has its appeal, but you can't really scale it. You can't really, it's not really ideal for a lot of end consumer products. So I definitely prefer butane, but let's go from the top. So if we're doing something like CO2, what's going to happen is you got these big long columns, and basically the CO2 is pressurized until around like 1,200 psi, and then all the buds are put inside this container, and then all of the CO2 is released, and it basically pulls everything but the biomass, and then you have this oil at the end. So what are some benefits to that? Well, benefit one is that obviously there's no solvents, right? So you don't really need to worry about any solvents left over at the end. CO2 is totally natural, and it doesn't really create any harm for us. The only issue with CO2 is because of the high pressures, it will also pull a lot of unwanteds, and so it's often the case where CO2 is used in more medicinal sense. It's not really going to be used for you're not going to be able to get your sauce or your diamonds out of that. It's just not really something that's used, and because of all the extra plant fats that it grabs afterwards, there's a lot more post-processing, and so because of that, that's typically why CO2 will cost more than say butane or something like ethanol. So our next case is ethanol extraction. So how does that happen? So typically what people will do is you have a centrifuge. So if a centrifuge is, imagine it's like a big container, almost like a washing machine, like on its side, and so it spins at a very high RPM, and then you put all your biomass inside of it, and then you will inject a lot of ethanol, and as it's spinning, what happens is all of the oils will be extracted from the biomass, and then you drain all of that from the biomass, and now you're left with this oil that is ethanol as well as your cannabinoid mixture. So after that, the next step is, well, now we need to separate the solvent from the oil because we don't want to be ingesting ethanol. So we have to basically evaporate off all of the ethanol, and then you leave the oil behind. And then ethanol is typically used far more in the hemp sector, primarily for distillation, because you can go through much larger volumes than say CO2 or butane. And you can, if you get all of the ethanol down to a really cold temperature, you'll do what's called inline winterization, which means that all the fats and the lipids a lot of them will be removed. So the post-processing afterwards will actually be a lot less work. So ethanol is sort of like the backbone of the hemp industry, and also does have a role to play in the THC industry if you're making distillate. So primarily, ethanol will be used as the first step for making what's called crude. Crude is the precursor to distillation. So once you have all of your crude and all the fats and the lipids are being removed from it, then it can go into distillation. And what distillation basically is it's a way to purify all of your compounds. You can imagine if you have something like crude oil and then you put your gas in your car, well, there's all these different types of fractions when you had your crude oil that they pulled off the best stuff, and then that's what goes in your car. So in the same way, through using temperature and vacuum, you're basically you'll have one pot over here which has all your oil in it, and then you have this what's called a short path evaporator, and then you have your mantle here, and then you have your collection pot here, and depending, there's heat that goes around this honey pot, or this mantle, and at certain temperatures what will happen is that the THC will evaporate and it comes down and it collects in here. The CBD comes up, it comes down, it collects in here, and that's how you get your THC or your CBD or your delta 8 distillate. And so with regards to distillation, depending on how many times that you purify it, you get higher percentages. So for some people, they go through this process. You have your crude, you have your distillate, they purify it, then they get this and they re-purify it again. And so and that's when you get a super clear, really hard distillate. And then finally we have our butane hash oil, which is my favorite because butane is just very versatile. It pulls a lot of the flavors. It's best for pulling flavor. I love flavor. That's really the main reason I like butane. And there's also a lot of products you can do after the fact. So you can make diamonds, you can do sauce, you can just make shatter and crumble, and just a lot of the big extracts that everyone enjoys are typically made of butane. And butane, so what we have is that you have your gas that's here, you've got your collection vessel, which would have all of your biomass or your flour inside of that, and the butane will run down and it washes over all of the flour, and then what's left underneath in the honey pot is this mixture of the butane as well as the butane hash oil. And so from there you have to remove all of the butane, and then you're left with your oil, and then that oil goes into a vacuum chamber, and that vacuum chamber basically is heated, and that removes any excess butane afterwards, and then you have your final product. And so that's basically all three of the main extractions. The other one is also rosin. Rosin basically works by having heated plates that will push together at a very high pressure, and then and there's a little bit of heat, so when it's really pushed together, all of the oils will come out of this little like bag that you put in all of your flour into. But in terms of scaling, it's just like, it's not something long term. It's not something that is scalable where you can say, hey, I'm doing 100 kilos of inputs a day. It's more like I'm doing a little ounce and I've got my little piece that comes out of it. And so that's why, because it can't be scaled, it's very expensive to do so. And then after all of that, then we start playing around with, well, how do we formulate these to go together? So for instance, sometimes we want to separate the terpenes, and then we want to add those terpenes back in with, say, our delta 8 and put them in our cartridge. That's going to be a blend of having some butane, hash oil, along with the distillate, merging that together to get that full cannabis experience. And so those are basically the four main extractions. And I would advise all of you to just ask some questions below. Is there anything that you felt that I missed out on? Is there anything more that you want to learn about that you don't have experience with? We're just going to go through it all every week, and slowly we're going to learn about all of these different processes together. And just really excited to have you all. I hope you all enjoyed this this educational tutorial that we gave today, and I look forward to all hearing you soon. Please make sure to leave the comments below and have that chance to get that free cart. And enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.